What's been the reaction of folks when you go through that and talk about the leverage for their whether it's allocators or individual advisors? How do they respond? Is it okay because the leverage is sort of cloaked, so it's not explicit, it's kind of built into some things, so they feel okay, or they can feel good, or they can get it through their compliance departments imparting this bit of leverage? What's been the pushback on the leverage? We know there's a great leverage aversion generally, so how have those conversations gone?
Well, yeah, I think you get the people who are kind of new to this concept. I mean, this is a concept as old as time, right? But for the retail space, we've never had to have this conversation before because it wasn't available before. So this is why language is so important. I think it's helped us quite a bit to be able to talk about creating portfolio real estate, stacking those returns on top. That's helping quite a bit get people across the line. But I think the first and the biggest, kind of initial reaction is, well, yeah, I'm stacking returns, but I'm also stacking a bunch of risk, right? You're levering up stuff. I don't, we're in an environment where I want to minimize and reduce risk for my clients. That's not kosher. I don't want to do that. And so we go quite a bit into the fact that we can stack returns while not necessarily stacking risk on top. In fact, if you do it the right way with the right products, you could reduce maximum drawdowns and keep the volatility relatively the same. And that's where selection of your stack is important, right? We could have chosen a wide variety of elements to put into that 33%, but we chose strategies that have an economic and behavioral reasoning for why they're likely to continue to provide diversification, why they have a structural non-correlation to bonds and stocks, and that's the future space, the CTAs, and systematic global macro. Right. So when you're able to stack on top something that has low correlation to your tracking or bias portfolio, then you can stack returns while not stacking risk. Right. So once you get them through that, this idea of things zigging when they're zagging and they're both making money, you start getting them excited.
Amit is making me excited. Come on. So Corey, here's the first good AMA question, right? So a certain pirate of finance once said risk cannot be destroyed, only transformed. So is that what we're doing here?
Thrown back in my face.
Is it financial alchemy that you're proposing here, or what's going on under?
No, not at all. Look, I think when people think about leverage, let's acknowledge that just about every major financial catastrophe has involved leverage in some capacity, right? But it's often very concentrated leverage. So you look at long-term capital management or the credit crisis of 2008. Yes, there was huge amounts of leverage that ultimately were at a cause of the problem there, but it was leverage that was concentrated into a single bet, right? I think when people look at the return stacking, they get nervous about leverage. I like to point out almost everyone uses leverage in their day-to-day life. If you borrowed to go to university, great, you were using leverage to invest in your human capital. If you used a mortgage to buy a house, great, you were using leverage to return stack real estate, very idiosyncratic real estate, but real estate returns on top of your investment portfolio. Almost everyone uses leverage. If you invest in the S&P 500, the average company has like 3 turns of leverage, right? I mean, and that's what we want them doing. We want them borrowing at low rates to invest in growth opportunities. That's good use of capital. And yet we don't want to do it with our own investment capital. So the way I look at it is I say, I can get a return stacked portfolio. We're not necessarily destroying risk. We can't destroy risk. But what we can do is say, if I start with a 60-40 and I introduce some return stacking to say add managed futures. Well, I think those managed futures are going to reduce the risk of my portfolio in an inflationary environment, but they're going to increase the risk of my portfolio potentially in certain types of endogenous liquidity cascades where there's forced margin calls and everyone has to degross at the same time. You're just changing around where that risk is. But I think the goal ultimately is that in using leverage, you can introduce excess return sources, and the added risk that you're adding on top is not is appropriate for the amount of extra return that you're getting. And you're not creating concentrated risk in one particular environment. It's not like we're saying, take all that extra real estate and invest in the riskiest stocks you can, right? It's trying to be an orthogonal source of returns, both from a asset class perspective and structurally the type of trades that are being made.